Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Breakfast Meeting. Maybe I should have said a very good morning to the 44+ million Ugandans and the 8 billion humans on planet Earth. Quite an interesting time for the world, for Earth. And just to let that sink in, we're 8 billion. Not to worry, this could be a good thing where we begin to have a conversation on what does this mean, how do we plan for it, but also very importantly, we do not need to bury our head in the sand. We need to face the reality and ask ourselves the very hard questions. What does this mean? How do we plan for it? And I'm happy to have this conversation this morning as we talk about the day of the 8 billion that will be under the theme, A World of Infinite Possibilities. So we're going to talk about it in a good way, but then also very importantly, have that open conversations on how we can be able to plan for these 8 billion humans on planet Earth. This morning, I'm delighted to have the Honorable Minister, the State Minister for Finance and Planning, Honorable Amos Lugoloobi. A very good morning to you, Honorable Minister. And he did not come alone. He came with Mr. Daniel Alemu, who is the Deputy Representative of the United Nations agency that is responsible for data and statistics. They're the ones who are telling us where we stand in terms of how we're doing in terms of population. So happy to have you, Daniel,
Thank you. Good morning.
on the show today this morning. Honorable, I'll start with you.
Yes.
I want to know your sentiments, your feelings about us hitting that 8 billion mark.
Well, good morning to our listeners. I think it is very important that we mark this very important day. I know this 8 billion mark was attained on the 15th of November when we are attending the Family Planning International Conference in Bangkok. On that date, we got to a mark of 8 billion people in the country. And as you may note, that almost after 10 years, we get an additional 1 billion people. And you can imagine what 1 billion people are. The example you could take is a big field like the Manchester United football field. The stadium actually accommodates about 80,000 people. Looking at them, you would see so many people. Now, you begin to relate that to a country, to a world that has a finite or a fixed size of land where the population is growing annually. And here you are with 8 billion occupying the same size of land because this land does not expand. So we are challenged in terms of how we manage these environmental and natural resources. You know, of course, God gave us dominion over his creations. We have to take care of them. We ourselves produce children, the animals produce, the environment gets depleted, and we have to take care of all these. So when we get to 8 billion people, we're actually talking about how do we plan for all these people to make sure that the environmental resources we have are not compromised. How do they live a good life? How do they earn a good income? So that tomorrow we are able to talk about a good national income and a country which has attained middle income status or a developed nation status. You can only achieve those if you manage your population well. Now in Uganda, we have a very young population. And the import of that is that you have a highly dependent population. You have to make sure that you provide for early childhood development. You have to provide for universal primary education. You have to make sure that those resources are available, taking them to secondary and up to university, so that you have such a resourceful population. You don't want a population that is terribly impoverished, that will have to depend on the government, where the government has to depend on its people, but the people to depend on are actually totally incapacitated. So you're talking about a situation where you have a population with a demographic dividend. In other words, you have a population that is productive and that can sustain itself. Do you want me to add more?
Well,
I could if you still have more time.
We're going to have that conversation. Let me turn to Daniel. For a UN agency, the United Nations Population Fund, that is responsible for keeping track on the data and statistics, the 8 billion mark, What did this mean to you guys?
Thank you, Victoria. I think we need, first of all, maybe to backtrack a bit and maybe just to give a bit of background on the United Nations Population Fund. So the United Nations Population Fund is the United Nations arm responsible for reproductive health and reproductive rights in the UN system. Our mission globally, and of course also here in Uganda, is to ensure that every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. Now, under that mission, we've been guided by a number of global summits and conferences in which Uganda has been a leading, of course, participant member state. And just to state, maybe the most important one was the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo. And there, really, the discussion on development and sustainable development took, I would say, historic shift when sexual and reproductive health became front and center of sustainable development. And since then, with the commitment of all member states, the support, of course, of the UN family and development partners, we have seen that countries have made really steady progress, including Uganda. Whether it is reducing maternal mortality, whether it is increasing access to family planning and modern contraceptive prevalence rate, whether it is increasing percentage of women delivering at health facilities, I think we have seen really a steady increase. 25 years later, we marked the 25th anniversary of this conference in Nairobi, and there also we saw that member states came together to recommit to the spirit of Cairo, and even to take these commitments further. And we were proud that the government of Uganda decided to make a number of commitments, including some financial commitments. Now, under that, within this context, reaching, I think, a population of 8 billion for us, of course, in the UN system, is an opportunity to underscore that we need really to shift the conversation from numbers to, if you want, quality. Just like Honorable Minister said, how do we actually now produce a more productive population? We are seeing many countries, including here in Africa, where the median age is 17 years compared to 41 years old, for example, in some of the Western countries. We're seeing a huge youth bulge. Now, these young people, as the Honorable Minister was saying, they need really to have access to education, access to health, they need employment opportunities. And for us as UNFPA, we really advocate for a rights-based approach, a youth-centered approach that will allow governments and policymakers to really take a very deliberate approach in making smart investments in young people. So all in all, we see this as an opportunity. Of course, there will be those that will say, oh, this is a doom and gloom scenario. But for us, really, we want really to look at the positive side of this conversation, and say that it's still within our hands as partners, as governments, really, to ensure that those populations are given those opportunities, and we're able really to harness, if you want, a demographic dividend to allow really us all, governments, countries, societies, to benefit from this really increase in the young people of productive age.
Honourable Minister, the good thing is when they announced the 8 billion you at the International Conference for Family Planning, but then also Uganda has made a couple of commitments. I'll talk about the ICPD Nairobi commitment. We have committed certain amounts of money towards family planning. 20 million US dollars was supposed to be mobilized through the partners. How how are we doing as a nation? And gladly enough, you work in a docket that plans, gives the finances as well. How do we move as a country? First of all, maybe we could discuss how we are performing in regards to that. But then how do we move from just these commitments to actions?
You are right that we made a number of commitments at the ICPD summit in Nairobi, and I reiterated these commitments in Bangkok recently. And the government of Uganda, among other things, committed to increase the modern contraceptive prevalence rate for all women from 30.4% in 2020 to 39.6% by 2025, and reduce the unmet need from 17% in 2020 to 15% by 2025. You know, for some time I think we have been underlooking the importance of the availability of contraceptives in Uganda, and perhaps that's the reason why our birth rate, fertility rate is still very high. You know, our population has been growing at about 3.2% annually, and this perhaps is one of the highest in the world, you know. And you have to produce based on your capacity to actually hold those babies, to manage those babies. But where you have a situation that a child is carrying children behind her, that is unwarranted and undesirable. So we have to make sure that we provide contraceptives. In Uganda, we have been largely dependent on donors in the provision, and NGOs in the provision of these contraceptives. But they have a limit to which they can go. So there is a lot of need out there which has not been met. And that is the unmet need that I'm referring to. I think as government, we really need to come in to make sure that these commitments actually become a reality. The second commitment is that, noting that Uganda is one of the youngest countries in the world, we are committing to annually allocate at least 10% of maternal and child health resources to adolescent responsive health services. Issues of maternal health are very critical. A number of women die during these deliveries, or slightly before or slightly after. So we need to be monitoring this and make sure that these women actually have access to health facilities. And that's why we have programs such as the UGIFT, Uganda Government Intergovernmental Fiscal Transfer System, where we are constructing health centers at every sub-county level in Uganda. And that is intended to enhance access, you know, and we're elevating all the health center 2s to health center 3s in order that we ensure that maternal service delivery is actually available and is accessed. You remember our women used to go to the traditional birth attendants, yes. And many of them would actually die there because the attendants do not have the capacity to manage these women, you know. And then we talk about the infant mortality. The children, when they are born, what are the chances that they survive after the age of 5 years? All these are big commitments, and we have been improving annually. Fertility rate, at one time, you recall, the other census, it was at 6.9. You know, an average woman would have about 7 children. That's too much, you know, as an average. It means that certain women have more than 10. And in many cases, they were not able to manage them because they did not have the capacity to finance the requirements of these babies. So we are addressing all these, and through more and more development being attained in the country, women become wiser, and through greater employment, you know, the fertility rate actually goes down. You know, if you are required to come here every morning, surely you will not need to carry so many babies because you will not be able to come here.
Interesting time. Yesterday we ran a story, a gentleman in Toro who has over 12 women, and we're counting children to numbers of double numbers, and grandchildren. Maybe if you can speak to some of the best practices that other countries are putting in place that Uganda can emulate, that maybe you picked from this conference you attended.
Yeah, well, listening to some of the countries, they were sharing their experiences in terms of the depth of access to family planning services in those countries. And I could see that as a country, we had a lot of gaps compared to those countries. A country like China, it would be interesting to learn that they have been able to manage their population around 1.4 billion. You would have imagined that with 1.4 billion people, China's population would actually get to 2 billion people within a short period. But they have been able to manage it. How? Because we had someone talking from China, and he told us what they are doing. One of them is to ensure that there is full involvement on matters relating to family planning. Perhaps we have not been able to give that level of attention. In India, they have been able to do the same thing. The government is providing resources to make sure that the population is properly managed. You know, the mothers are taken care of, children are taken care of, ensure that the children remain in school. When you look at our dropout rate here, children at primary one level, primary one, you have about 3 million children there. The other day I had a discussion with the executive secretary of the examination board, and he was telling me in primary one alone, you have 3 million children. When they get to PLE, P7 to sit for exam, only this time is when the number went up, slightly up, from 500,000, half a million, to 800,000 pupils sitting at P7 level. So what happened to the 2.2 million children that started primary one? They dropped out. And this is how you end up with situations of early marriages. So we need to make sure, like the Indians and Chinese have done, these children remain in school, you know, up to the age of 24. You know, we need to make sure that that really happens. And we need to make sure that they are informed about the consequences, you know. So these countries have programs of sensitizing the population, making them aware of the implications and issues relating to reproductive health, you know, maternal services, early childhood, early marriages, you know, all these issues. People are totally aware. He was talking about rights. They have the right to know about all these things. So I think we really learned a lot, and we refreshed our commitment on these issues that we discussed in Nairobi, in Egypt, and in all these conferences. You know, we refreshed our commitment on these matters. Right now, we are preparing the midterm review of the National Development Plan. And I've already told the National Planning Authority that we need to put at the fore issues of family planning. So we are looking actually at the Human Capital Development Program. The way we had written it, we had not given it enough emphasis. Now I've instructed them to give more emphasis on family planning issues. And we are reading all the papers that we discussed in Bangkok. So there were a lot of lessons to learn. And I think we need to widen our collaboration with partners such as the UNFPA, you know, on these matters, because they are more experienced. They have the lessons in Nigeria, everywhere, you know, and so we can pick from that wisdom all the time. And I'm happy, and I'm with him, you know.
Daniel, I want you to come in here. It's going to be a very tough topic to sell to an African man. First of all, we believe we don't count children, and here we are talking about family planning, so the minister has a very big job on his hands. But I want you to speak to financing of family planning, because here we are, and some of our commitments is us leveraging on partners to finance for instance, some of these projects like modern contraceptive prevalence rates that we see here in Uganda. But then how do development partners come in here to help Uganda transition to financing family planning?
Yeah. Thank you, Victoria. I think, as the Honourable Minister said, Uganda has set a relatively ambitious target of moving modern contraceptive prevalence rate from 30% in, I think, in 2020 to almost 40% in 2025. At the moment, based on the data that we have, it stands at 34%, which is, of course, progression, but still low. So certainly one big, if you want, the elephant of the room as far as family planning is concerned is financing. So of course we have to ensure that we also create demand by educating the population, by ensuring that they're more informed about their rights, especially young people. We need also, of course, to ensure that supply is continuous, but financing is really the big elephant in the room. Now, on financing, there is, of course, a positive story to tell as well. I think from our data and from the data that we have seen, the financing of family planning by the national budget has been increasing. I think in 2015 it was around 80% funded by development partners, and now it stands to around 60% as we speak, which I think is a good progression, but it's still, of course, not enough, especially in a country where out-of-pocket expenditure is around 40% on health. So the development partners, of course, have been very much forthcoming to this conversation. They have been really supportive of national efforts to ensure availability of all methods of family planning to the population. As UNFPA, we were also, of course, one of the agencies, if you want, that has been coordinating some of these efforts through a partnership that we call the UNFPA Supplies Partnership. That essentially is composed of a number of key donors supporting the provision, the procurement, provision, and dissemination of family planning methods and contraceptives to many countries across the world, including Uganda. Now, this year in particular, we have tried, also in the behest of our partners, to shift the conversation and say, okay, because obviously the partner support to family planning and contraceptives procurement and commodity security is not really sustainable, we would need to see how gradually the government could step in so that we can also draw down, given that, of course, we are working we are living in a world of infinite possibilities, but not infinite resources, unfortunately. So, and when we met with Honourable Minister and as well with our partners at the Ministry of Health, I think they really showed us their determination and readiness. And at this stage, we have looked at a symbolic contribution of 1% of the total value of the commodities coming to Uganda through this supplies partnership. But of course, this will increase with time. So development partners at the moment, of course, still play a critical role, but by and large, of course, this has to be done under the leadership of the government, and there, of course, increased financial contribution over time. So we are pleased to see that in Uganda we have a strong partner in the government, and we're really looking forward to having, of course, this transition, if you want, completed over the years.
The Minister brought in a very important aspect, the Human Capital Development Program that was adopted, and the readjustments that they're working on right now towards the life cycle approach of keeping track birth registration, towards the whole entire journey of someone's milestones, so we can be able to provide quality and access to everybody so that we don't leave everyone behind. What advice would you then give Uganda on improving vital registration and also using data for planning?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there's no way we can live up to the principle of leaving no one behind and achieving the sustainable development goals if we cannot count everybody. we need really to know who are these most vulnerable populations, who are those that are left behind, so that we're able really to design programs and policies that are favorable to them and could allow them really to be lifted from poverty and from the vulnerable situation that they're in. So in that respect, data and statistics are key. For me, there are maybe around 3 components that are key when we talk about really data and statistics in any country. The first one is planning for data and statistics, and in that regard, we have seen that the government of Uganda and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics has been adopting progressive national strategies for the development of statistics. I think the current one is the 3rd national strategy for the development of statistics that runs from 2020 to 2024, that essentially takes stock of all the statistical activities that the country is planning or intending really to execute, as well as costing them, because budget is very important. The second component is coordination, and there it's extremely also, of course, or equally important for the government and the National Statistical Office, UBOS here in Uganda, to work very closely with all partners, including within government. Because as you know, data collection is not limited only to what UBOS does, but in fact every ministry also has a process by which they collect data. And so ensuring the quality, the integrity of this data set is very important. So having this coordination is key, and also working, of course, with development partners who fund many of these statistical activities to avoid duplication and see how we can synergize. And finally is financing. And financing, of course, is very important because obviously, even if you have a plan, even if you are coordinating, if you're not really able to put the necessary funding and financing, obviously we're not able to conduct all these statistical activities. And in that regard, I would say that we have seen that the government has been also stepping up to take the census, for example. I think in previous rounds of censuses, perhaps the government contribution was 60, 70%. I think in the last census, if I'm not mistaken, it was around 80%. Okay. And in this now upcoming census, to my understanding, the government contribution will even be higher than 80%. So this is, as I said, extremely important, and it also signals the level of national ownership from the side of the government to financing all these statistical activities. So I hope that answers your question.
Honorable Minister, we hold our 6th population and housing census, I do believe in August or September next year. The financing question still is the elephant in the room. 80% and above, that's, I would say, it's quite impressive. Do we have the monies for next year's census?
Well, as we learn in economics, money is a very scarce commodity. But you have to make choices based on the resources we have. Considering that data is very critical in our development agenda, I think we have to forego certain things and finance the national census, to be able to obtain the data that we need, because we cannot plan well without statistics. We must understand our population demographics, well, the structure of our population, the rate at which it is increasing, all the various parameters relating to the population so that we can plan well. We have not been able to yet to establish a robust national statistical system, because where you have such a system, you are able to register everybody at birth, and you are able to maintain that life cycle until when someone dies. So you are able to record the deaths as they happen. But as it is in Uganda, someone dies in the village, they just take him or her for burial. They don't report. So the statistics actually is lost out. We would actually be saving a lot of money. We may perhaps not even need these censuses if we had an effective registration system from birth to death, because we'll be capturing all these statistics as we go along. And fortunately, we actually have all the necessary legal frameworks in place. The institutional frameworks are there. You have the NIRAs of this world, you know, you have the URSB, you have all these agencies, the Bureau of Statistics. We have them, but as we mentioned, for lack of resources, we are not yet there. We have not yet established a robust statistical system. But this time around, we expect that we should be able to finance the national population census by 90%. But we are working in partnership. You heard the theme of this whole thing, 8 billion mark, the theme is about partnerships. So we are working with our partners. The UN system, the UN family is supporting us. You know, this coming population census is an improved, we are witnessing improvements in terms of the technologies we use. Previously, we were using a questionnaire, a written questionnaire. So someone would come and record. This time around, we are going to use modern gadgets.
They would write on our doorsteps.
Yes. Well, an enumerator comes, picks all the data, and in real time transmits that information to the collating center somewhere. You know, so within a short time, we should be able to report our population statistics. Previously, it would take us over 2 years collating this information. It would be such a huge job. Now, we are using gadgets, and the UN family is helping us in the procurement of these gadgets at a reasonable rate. We are saving a lot of money, and that's why our contribution may go up to 90%. Because of the savings we have been able to achieve through these partnerships. We have already sent teams from WUBOS and the Ministry of Finance to benchmark other countries. Recently, they were in Tanzania. Tanzania, I think, has just had a population census done. So they are learning from them to avoid those pitfalls that they experienced during the process of collecting this data. So I think it is very, very vital that we collect this information, because we cannot plan without information. You need to know whom you are planning for, you know, how many are they, what do they need, where are the gaps. Recently in the PDM, the Parish Development Model, you noted that we are targeting those people that have been left behind, you know, that are still in subsistence production. Without surveys or censuses, how are you able to establish these 39%, who they are? You know, in this census, we're actually georeferencing the population. We should be able to know where Victoria lives, you know, and we should be able to monitor you, because now we have the GPS of your house, of your homestead, so we know where you are. So that is going to be a very big landmark in the process of collecting this population. So we should be able to tell that this person who constitutes the 39% is actually residing there at that GPS. So all these other subsequent surveys can now be easily conducted using the population census data.
Is it a concern, considering Uganda's population more than doubles every 20 years? Speak to the country's population trends, and how do we generate dialogue for action, because that's what is really important.
I think what is important is how do we harness this population. Uganda's population today at about 44.5 million people is not an alarming population per se. You know, we agree we have a youthful population. And so it's better to have a youthful population to have an aging population. You have noted that countries like Korea are decelerating in terms of population growth. Their population instead is actually coming down. It's a very big concern. Ours is going up. We definitely need the numbers. You know, if we are going to talk about markets, why are we integrating as East Africa? The reason why we are integrating is to put together all these numbers so that we are able to sell the goods and services that we produce. The more people we have within East Africa, the more people we supply our maize to, you know. And that's why we want the likes of Ethiopia to join the East African community, you know. So the numbers, for now, is not a big problem. There are countries with whom we are occupying the same land sizes, and their population is higher than us. You know, the challenge has been, how do we manage this population? How do we harness this resource? And that's why we have come up with programs such as the universal primary and secondary education to make that, to ensure that we have a resourceful population. And we really need to focus on this. And you know that we have invested heavily in oil, and we expect to get returns. And these returns should be appropriately invested on human capital development. And once that is done, you know, the producers of goods and services would happily market it to this population. And this intervention about PDM is to make sure that nobody is left behind. You know, they are all moving. They are all moving, and we want to make the population very productive. Literacy issues are all being addressed. Our literacy rate, I think, has improved dramatically. Life expectancy has improved dramatically. We make sure we immunize the population, feed them well, make sure that they are properly fed. Early childhood development is provided to avoid stunting of the population at that early stage. So once we have addressed all these issues relating to numbers, you know, will actually not be a problem. And some of these people are still producing so many kids. Why? For lack of proper awareness, because we have not kept them in school. You know, once we have implemented the laws about keeping a child in school, I'm very sure that we shall deal with some of these challenges.
Daniel, I wanted to speak to two questions. One, the minister brings in a very important aspect of the life cycle approach and the role it plays and how it will be able to help with keeping data and feeding the statistical data system, which has loopholes here in Uganda or still has gaps. One, how do we improve that? But also very importantly, the second question I wanted to respond to is, how do we mobilize? How do we harness this growing population, the current population dynamics to influence development?
Sure, thank you. I think, yes, there are, of course, at the moment, pardon me, gaps in the national statistical system. I think the Honorable Minister also spoke to them. I spoke to them also earlier. I think, first of all, when it comes really to data generation, we need really a statistical system that is able to vet and ensure that the data produced is of high quality, of high standards, and is also disaggregated, really to allow us to track and measure those things that we really want measured. Secondly, when it comes to data use, we are also seeing gaps. We have a lot of data being produced, but and that's not only Uganda. You will find always that it's not sufficiently being used by policymakers, by authorities at the national, subnational levels, even by various stakeholders, even in the non-government sector. So ensuring that we're also providing sufficient orientation and we're disseminating also this data very effectively is key for it to be used effectively by these various stakeholders. Then on the issue of dissemination and using really technology in that sense, I think the fact that Uganda is conducting its first digital census is a huge step forward, and we're very happy about this, and we really commend the government. I think we also need, in addition to that, to put in place maybe a platform or a system that could allow for data exchange and sharing between government ministries, between government offices, that will allow more effective mining of, for example, census data survey data, and of course encourage partnership as well with academic institutions who ultimately probably are the ones best placed to do this mining and analyze the data, maybe to reveal, further gaps or further development challenges that the country is facing. So that's I think on some of the gaps and possibly how we can meet them. Going back again to how do we harness the power of 44 million, if you want, here in Uganda. I have spoken earlier, and so has Honorable Minister, about this concept of demographic dividend. The idea is that where you have declining fertility and mortality levels, where you have a spike in the working age population of a country that is usually young, like we have here in Uganda, there is a demographic window that any country has. And we've seen, for example, some countries in Asia, they have had that window and they manage really to benefit from it. So that window really gives what we call a demographic dividend, whereby if the proper investments are made, the country could benefit a lot from this working age population at its disposal. But again, there's a big if there. And the questions there are, is, for instance, at the moment, Uganda making sufficient investments in education, sufficient investments in health, and sufficient investments really in creating a job market that is really tallied to the needs of the country, as well as the skills that young people are actually being exposed to and educated at schools and at tertiary level institutes. So I think if these three things are, of course, are provided for, then there's no doubt that Uganda will be on track really to achieve its demographic dividend and also achieve the middle income status that the Honorable Minister spoke to. Now, there is one challenge I do want to highlight, which is very important. I think the Minister spoke about it, is that we're still seeing a very worrisome trend of teenage pregnancy in Uganda. While we have seen the teenage pregnancy rate decrease from almost 50% to now 24%, I think it was around 50% in the early 90s, and in 2006 it was brought down to 25%, and since then it has stagnated. So that means that still, as we speak, 1 out of 4 adolescent girls in Uganda is getting pregnant. In sheer numbers, it comes to around 30,000 per month or 1,000 pregnancies per day. That's really mind-boggling figure. And in our view, we do not think that it will be possible for any country, for that matter, to reap a demographic dividend as long as we have this really striking figure, 1 out of 4 girls getting pregnant. So we need really to mobilize ourselves and mobilize all our partners and stakeholders to immediately resolve this situation and ensure that this teenage pregnancy rate continues decreasing, right? So I just wanted also to highlight that as a very key impediment, if you want, for Uganda and the country to achieve the demographic dividend.
Briefly, I wanted, before I cross over to the Minister, any countries, maybe some that you have interacted with, that have conducted their population or their housing census, any pointers Uganda can pick on? How are they doing? Are they doing it well? Which ones can we benchmark on?
Specifically on the census? Yeah, I think what we have seen now in this new round of censuses is that they have almost completely transitioned to digital censuses, right? And that, of course, entails that the country has to be prepared. It has to build its capacity. It has, of course, to ensure that it has the necessary resources, including human resources, to really be able to conduct this type of census. So I think even in the East Africa region, Kenya, Tanzania, all these countries, to my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, have conducted a digital census. So I think the minister mentioned there's been a benchmarking exercise, and there's been some study tours between Uganda and some of these countries, really to take stock of their experiences and how best they should really proceed with the digital census. Obviously, anything that you do for the first time will be challenging, and there will be challenges and pitfalls. But we firmly believe, as UNFPA, that Uganda is on the right track by really deciding to conduct a digital census. As expensive as it is, as complicated as it is, I think that's really the future of data collection. And so we're, as I said, we're really happy that we are proceeding with that exercise.
Oh, it looks like we're heading in the right direction, Honorable Minister. But he brings in a very important question. The window that comes with being a young population. I would say we have the biggest window, if you ask me. We have the youngest population. We're among those that have the youngest population. So the demographic dividend, that if are we investing in the right health, education, investments, job creation, the issue of teenage pregnancies, how do we address it? Where are we going wrong?
Well, as I mentioned, the necessary legal frameworks are in place.
Which we have.
The institutions are there. We've built a number of classrooms. We have made available a number of school teachers. You know, I think our challenge is about enforcement. In fact, when you go to the Education Act, it's criminal not taking a child to school. If you leave your child behind and does not attend class, you are bound to be charged. What is unfortunate is that this law is not being appropriately enforced. And I'm trying to find out why. The other day I was interviewing a district education officer from my district who was retiring. I asked her, why don't you arrest these parents who are not sending children to school? And she told me, Honorable, there are a lot of challenges in doing this. You know, the parents themselves could easily kill you. They would isolate you. She actually mentioned there are a lot of problems in enforcing that provision, and I'm still wondering why. I asked her, why don't you, take advantage of the police station that's nearby to help you on these matters? Still, she would not give me an acceptable answer. It's something that we need to interrogate very seriously. Because for us to reduce these child pregnancies, these early marriages, we need to make sure that the girl child is kept in school. She is right there, all the way through. And the families, this household, we need to make sure that the earlier discipline we used to have is restored. Parents taking charge of their children. Many of them actually abandon the children they just abandon them anyway. They don't take good care of them. So the ministries, such as the Ministry of Gender, have to step in very seriously to make sure that children remain in school. There's actually a lot of strong collaboration that is needed here. Ministry of Gender, Ministry of Internal Affairs, the police, the judiciary. We have to all collaborate to make sure that these laws that we already have in place are effectively enforced. Gender need to cause a lot of awareness in the homes, the responsibilities of the parents. Many of them have abandoned their responsibilities. Because the parent to make sure that he or she sends the child to school, gives her a book or some books to go with, a uniform and food as well. These days, a head teacher asks a parent to contribute 2,000 shillings like this so that collectively they can buy bags of maize flour. But the parents, for some reason, do not want to make this contribution. And as a result, because children are hungry, they cannot stay at school. They have to go back home. And then they meet these marauding boys, and that's how they run out of school. They become pregnant. And that's why the statistic is talking about reduced from 50 to somewhere around 25 and stagnated at that. Why is it stagnating? It should move towards zero, like in other countries. Yeah? They report very low numbers of child pregnancies. And it is criminal. It's actually defilement. If you go with a girl that is below 18 years, and you know that if you are charged for defilement, you are kept in jail, I think, for a minimum of 15 years. But where are the prosecutors in all these matters? Or where are the policemen? Can they look for these guys?
I was going to ask that. What can we do? Because now we're talking
I think
about
this is where we are
action.
now challenged, where we really need to collaborate very seriously. I think it's a task, and I think we need to discuss it at a high level.
Do we pass new laws? Do we arrest? Do we use an iron hand?
The laws are there. It's a matter of enforcing these laws. Collaboration. We have to be fearless. I think the president needs to come out here. The prime minister, the vice president, they need to come out very strongly on these matters. But where you may not use the iron hand, but you may need to sensitize these people. The approaches that we need to employ, I think, are some of the lessons we need to pick from the UN family. How to go about some of these challenges.
Because I'm looking at it here, and I'm thinking, look here, we have the laws. We actually have good laws here in Uganda. And we're talking about a time where you say we stand no chance if we do not change this 1 out of 4 girls getting pregnant. We stand no chance of harnessing this population growth. We have the laws. They have been here for some time. We're talking about enforcement. An iron hand, the minister is saying it may not be the one we go that direction. What do we do?
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question. I think there are really a number of things we can concentrate on. First, for me, as far as the enabling environment is concerned, I appreciate, of course, there are a lot of laws, policies, but we have to interrogate all these laws and policies and determine, are they youth-centered? Are they youth-responsive sufficiently? What else can we do as a country, as a government? So that's maybe the first thing. And of course, the issue also of enforcement is very important. And for me, I may have alluded to that, and the Honorable Minister mentioned that. There's no way we can actually eliminate teenage pregnancy in Uganda if we don't adopt a multi-sectoral approach involving different sectors, different ministries, from health, education, justice, labor, agriculture. All these sectors have a role to play, and of course the police and whatnot. But I think for me there are also some quick wins besides this interrogation that we can do. Looking at the education sector, we have a huge responsibility really to equip young people with the skills that they need, the life skills that they need. And we have been promoting for a long time this concept of sexuality education. And what sexuality education means is not to teach children about sex. It's to teach children about their bodies. It's to give them the power to make decisions about their body, especially young girls. Because if we look at these teenage pregnancies, many of them may be happening among peers, right? But the more a young girl is educated, she's oriented, she knows her body, she knows she has the power to say no, then I think we'll have gone a very long way to ensure that we're able to reduce teenage pregnancy. Then when we look at the health sector, how can we ensure that we have really adolescent-friendly youth services that really are able to abide by confidentiality principles? So if you have a young person going there seeking a service, the health service provider should not threaten, I will now inform your family, but rather be in a position to accommodate the needs of that young person. Because, you know, sometimes these are life and death questions. I mean, if you have unprotected sex, you may as well contract STIs, sexually transmitted infections and whatnot. And it's extremely important that we have a whole of government, a whole of society approach to really addressing the needs of young people. So that's maybe what I can say humbly in terms of maybe some suggestions.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the 8 billion. How do we plan? We're choosing to look at it in a very positive way. As we conclude, Honorable Minister, you come in first here. What is that important take home in terms of our conversation, in terms of mobilizing funding, which is a big issue in so many ways? The census that we're about to do, but then also very importantly, putting to use the data that we get from the different studies that we will be conducting as a country, to the agreements we have signed, to our commitments as a nation. What, as we head into commemorating this 8 billion, a world of infinite possibilities, and looking at it in a very positive way, what should that be? What, as a country, especially Uganda, should we take home to make sure that we harness this population dynamic?
I think it is important to pick lessons, not try and reinvent the wheel. Where we have had good practices, we should be able to pick those good practices and bring them home. There's an issue that I should have mentioned earlier, that our education system is not very accommodative. Going to school or staying at school, you know, it's like you are on a punishment. The teachers are simply pumping a lot of academic material, you know, in someone, as if it is only this academic knowledge that is going to propel the child into the next generation. Learning should not be so complex like that. It should be learning with leisure. You know, it should be friendly. And because there's no fun in our education system, no fun, children are not eager, they are not desperate to go to school. We need to create an environment where a child feels compelled to go to school because he's meeting a teacher who is a friend. You know, you must have been at these international schools. You know, a teacher is a good friend of the student, of the pupil. You actually see a pupil going to the teacher to chat, to talk freely. In our academic system, it is not like that. A teacher is actually holding a stick in his hand all the time, you know, ready to hit on the child. That kind of an environment, tests after tests, you know, is not desirable. We really need to review our curriculum, our approach. That's how we shall make these children actually willingly walk to school. I think that's a very important take home. Learning with leisure, you know, with pleasure. It should be very user friendly. That's what we need to work for, in addition to what he has just said, sexual education. You know, we are talking about rights. How do people exploit their rights if they are not aware? You know, we are in a totally different generation. You have a generation, fourth generation, with these gadgets, accessing information at will. And we, the old people, still think that the generation is like our old generations. So these people have a lot of access to information already, you know, and we're here assuming that they don't know. When actually, when they go behind us, they know a lot, you know. So we really need to make sure that we provide this sexuality education so that they are aware. they have the right to pick, you know, and they find what they need to find what they ought to have. A condom should be readily available, you know, because for you to condemn a condom that's for all the people, you're making a big mistake. You're making a wrong assumption that this child, actually, these things are not happening. You know, they are really happening. And that is why you have this 1/4 of the adolescents still experiencing this problem of child pregnancies. We need to look at these statistics and look at what is behind these statistics. Why do we have this 25%, you know, children getting pregnant? We need to interrogate those issues carefully and look at the population dynamics and therefore be able to discern measures that address those issues. I think that's what we need to do on top of making sure that we provide jobs for our people. We need to continue investing continuously in infrastructure, in those facilities that help to skill our population, you know, and so on and so forth.
Well, thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Very strong words there. Daniel, as we conclude, your last remarks.
Yeah, I think this is a very opportune time for the world, but specifically here for Uganda. And as we conclude, I think our motto as UNFPA is rights and choices for all. And I really believe, truly, that this is really the way to go for Uganda. Ensuring that everyone's rights is upheld, you know, to health, to education, to information, as well as people, the population, given the choice to space their children, to decide when and how to make children. I mean, these are all very fundamental things that we need really to institute and persist in ensuring they are being effectively implemented here in the country. So with all the laws and policies, we still have, I think, a way to go to ensure they are enforced and ensure that the population is well educated and oriented to tap, of course, into all these services that are out there. So just in conclusion to say, again, this is an opportunity, but without the proper investment, it could also be a challenge. And we have now, I think, the ability to prevent that from happening by really ensuring we have these deliberate investments in health, education, in you know, employment opportunities, really looking at a youth-centered approach throughout.
Well, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the 8 billion should not alarm you. It could mean so many Ugandans are surviving. You know, the president always says there's a point in time where there was no immunization and babies were dying. That means maybe the health sector is making some strides. Maybe we're able to actually put some girls and children through education. It's a good thing. It's not an alarming thing. But like they said, if we do not plan for it, then we're headed for disaster. I'll speak to the girls. These ones I like to call sisters. The 1 to 4 girls getting pregnant is a concern. And like they said, you have a right to make that decision, and you have to speak to it firmly. Then I'll speak to the legislators. I would love to see more of you speak to some of the things that are, of course, coming up right now. Who are responsible? Why are our laws that we have, the very good ones, not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Where is the enforcement? Where are the gaps, and who is losing and who is not doing their part? Family planning is very important. I'll speak to the gentleman. The story ran yesterday, and up to now it's quite interesting. He has 13 women, the many grandchildren and girls, and someone was saying, please do not emulate him. Family planning is important, but then very importantly, collaboration for government agencies, Minister of Gender, Minister of Finance, for the minister who provides and budgets for the money, the legislators, you who do these budgetary allocations. What more can we do? This 8 billion, how do we harness that very big demographic milestone. This morning, I had Mr. Daniel Alemu, who is the Deputy Representative of the United Nations Populations Fund. He did not come alone. He came with the Honorable Minister Amos Lugoloobi, who is the State Minister for Finance and Planning, also a very important legislator representing the people of Ntenjeru North, that is in Kayunga District. He speaks very passionately about legislation because he's a legislator as well. Victoria Bagaya Chigundi is my name. I'll leave it here. 8 billion is not bad. How do we plan for it? Good morning.
Always. Welcome to the Living Room Stadium. It's the FIFA World Cup. The match is about to start. Food and drink ready. There's no space left for anyone. Come on, get your lucky chair. Take your usual spot. Even the puppy has one. It's preparation time. You can feel the tension in the air. And do you have everything you need to believe?
The recent pandemic times showed us the importance of owning or living in decent housing in organized communities. However, many challenges remain that make it hard to provide and own housing at a large scale. Even then, with several promising options coming up, there has never been a better time to get started owning a home. What can we do radically different today to house 1 million Ugandans a year in a decent, modern, affordable housing by 2030? Together with Housing Finance Bank and National Planning Authority, the NBS Housing Baraza is back for the 4th edition under the theme Building a Strong Housing Ecosystem, Partnering to House Generations. Join our partners Innovation Village, Uganda Revenue Authority, Plascon, National Social Security Fund and other housing sector stakeholders for the conversation happening on the 24th and 25th live on NBS Television and Sanyuka TV.
In this day and age, news and events happen in the blink of an eye. No story is as simple as it seems. But we take our responsibility to you, our viewers, very seriously. Our coverage of news and events that affect your life is unmatched. We offer in-depth analysis and opinions. We cover everything, everywhere. We dig deeper. We are live. NBS always.